Om Shri Sai Ram.
So,
Brother Ashok Sakhrani, welcome to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And as we say in this country, kia ora, welcome, and Sai Ram.
very pleased to be here.
It's absolutely our pleasure to have you. How long have you been in New Zealand?
Since Thursday lunchtime, so 2 days. And the weather's been a bit cloudy, but today we had sun. And
we were inside.
And we were inside. but I was able to step out and see the beautiful countryside. I just love the trees and the lush greens and the river in the distance, and that was very nice. And the fresh air.
And the fresh air.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah.
You mentioned today during the conference that as part of the SSIO Sustainability Committee, being in New Zealand was quite refreshing for you. Can you start off by speaking a little bit to that observation?
Well, I'm not sure why I was chosen to be in the Environmental Sustainability Committee, but it's been a really a wonderful experience with nature, and I think it's really coincided with my own sort of prayers to Swami. I would love for the opportunity to see Swami in his form again. But somehow I feel what he would want is for me to be able to see him everywhere. And so environmental sustainability is great because you get more sensitive to the environment. And what's happened over the last year is I've become more attuned to the importance of the trees and the rivers and the clouds and the damage we human beings are doing to it. And I think that experience of becoming more aware of it, because we come from a city which is just so heavily built up, and you don't see the sky as much in the same way you do here, and you don't have as much greenery, and the air is polluted a bit. You get more sensitive to your environment. And then coming to a place like New Zealand, where it's just so spacious and there's so much greenery and the air is so fresh, and that's sort of coming together where you now becoming more alive to your environment and having that responsibility, and then trying to see the spiritual dimension of that relationship between man and nature. Because Swami, and this was a main theme at the conference we had, the Go Green conference last year, God, nature and man. And before that I was not really thinking that closely about it. But it all came together with the conference, with that appointment, with the work. And now you see nature and you realize, this is wondrous. This is really wonderful. And then the question is, can you learn to see Swami in nature? And one of the aspects which sort of come into my awareness is the sun shining on me. And today was a good example, which is just the sun just keeps beaming down. And it's almost as if that divine illumination is blessing you. And so for me, being here and the sun was shining and the temperature was just perfect. And it was nice and cool and the sun was shining. And so it's wonderful. And being in New Zealand is part and parcel of that experience, which sometimes I lack in a place like Hong Kong.
In many ways, I guess it's the polar opposite of Hong Kong. New Zealand, environmentally speaking. Yeah,
but I'm relatively lucky because I look out my window and I see a bit of greenery, but I see 1,000 buildings too.
Yes.
But today was nice, so you just don't see that. That was nice.
And how refreshing it is to have you make this observation. I think when we live in this country, we tend to take it for granted. And it's beautiful to see it through your eyes.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I came out tonight after dinner and I just stepped out, and this time I couldn't see any of the greenery. I couldn't see the water anymore, but the moon was bright. It was just bright looking down, and that was lovely as well. And so Swami puts things together, and you begin to realize why you are doing environmental sustainability work, and that for me is so closely linked to my sadhana. I've come to take the view that I prepared a paper before the Environmental Sustainability Conference, and I came across a wonderful quotation from a Swamiji in India, and he said, the environmental crisis is actually a spiritual crisis. And in the course of preparing that paper, I was also researching what the other religions had to say about the relationship between man and God and the earth. And then you realize that all the religions actually speak about that connection in some form or another. Hinduism speaks about it in a certain way, and Christianity, Islam, they speak about it in a slightly different way. But they all speak about that relationship between man and nature, man being a custodian of nature, nature being a gift of God. And so, you know, you come to the realization that you have a relationship with that environment, and it's a relationship based on that purity, and that every religion speaks of it. And so if you say to me, what's your motivation for environmental sustainability? It is that everything is a gift of God, everything. And it's come to a stage now where, you know, you're brushing your teeth in the morning. You just dare not use more water than you should. Because that's, you know, for a while I was thinking water is a gift of God. And now the sort of greater awareness is seeping in, oh, water is God. And so that's great, you know, you've been given an opportunity to serve, and along with that is a greater sense of awareness that's necessary for that opportunity. So for me, environmental sustainability is really a spiritual question. You know, we're not scientists, we're not environmentalists, but we're spiritual scientists. And so I think as an organization, that's what the message we bring to the table. And Swami's been wonderful that way, because he's spoken about it for about 30, 40 years, and you know, he's given very, very practical examples, not driving, and he talks about the need for reforestation. And so those insights have been there for a long time, and the sad reality is we've been ignoring it. And now the time has come to change our ways, and I think Swami, that devotion to Swami, the teachings of Swami, and is for me a great motivation, a great inspiration. But the boon, as I said, is, you know, when you're standing in the sun and, you know, the light comes shining on you and you breathe that fresh air and you see the beauty of that tree. So it's a great boon, you know, very fortunate to be doing that work.
It's interesting that you mentioned the decades of discourses that Swami's been giving us on the environment.
Yeah.
But also are the practical examples that he himself has been exemplifying.
That's right.
As Professor Gangadhar Shastri shared
Yeah.
with us today. And it seems as if you've taken a leaf out of Swami's book in terms of saving water and so on. Can you talk a little bit about your own personal practice, your own personal sadhana, your habits, and how you are taking on these messages and insights that Swami's given you?
You know, I'll tell you, there was, Swami always was the exemplar, the best exemplar. And there's a story of how Swami, when he finishes an interview, he would always switch off the fan first,
Yes.
before he switches off the light. And the reason for that is, when he switches off the fan, the blade is still turning.
Yes.
So the coolness is still being generated. And so he can switch off the fan, knowing the coolness is still being generated, and then he switches off the light. And now that's really, really minute attention to detail. And that's that level of awareness about our responsibility to the environment. So, you know, examples like that have really made me look at the way I use water. I work in an office which is about 5,000 square feet, and at about 7 o'clock at night, you know, the receptionist is gone, you don't expect anybody. And so I will make it a point to switch off half the lights in chambers. And so, you know, you just, because you see Swami, read Swami's messages, because you see the example in his life, and you say, you know, that's what I need to follow. That's part of my sadhana. It's not just something you do.
Yes.
It's part of your sadhana. You can't say I love God, but I abuse His creation. You know, and so if you want to be true to your love for Him, then you love His creation and you do what He says, which is use your resources in moderation. So there's still work to do. I still need to improve myself. But you know, that sort of thinking has already started, and yeah, we just have to see every opportunity to save, because we really don't have the right to overuse the Earth's resources. And you know, if we're not responsive, then you already see the consequences in the world around us. And so I think everyone has to take responsibility.
I like what you said about loving God's creation, and also what you said earlier about starting to see the creation as God, not just merely a gift of His. It's a beautiful journey that you've just shared with us, this brief journey of a couple of years through your involvement in the Environment and Sustainability Committee. I wonder if you could take us back to the beginning of that journey, when it all first began with you coming to know about Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba.
You know, the funny thing is, incidents happen in our life and we're never aware of the significance of it. So before we even had a Sai Center in Hong Kong, there were a group of people who had started working out of somebody's office, and there was a lady who used to run Balvikas classes, and her house was near the garden where I used to play. And I remember one day someone said to me, yes, I was about 10, 11 maybe, yeah, thereabouts. And someone said to me, it was Saturday and they were going to this woman's house, and did I want to come? And I just went along not knowing what I was going for. And I went to this lady's house and she was having this class. And I had shorts, short pants on, and I had a short pair of short sleeveless shirt on. And I went and I never went again. You know, I just, and then a few years had gone by, and then my maternal uncle was the first president of the Sai Center in Hong Kong. And my parents at that time used to go to the Hindu temple. And there was a very lovely man who used to lead the discourses at the temple. And my parents were very, very close to him. And at the same time, my maternal uncle used to come to the house sometimes, and I used to, he used to come and talk to his sister and my dad, and they used to talk about a variety of things. And I found out later he was also coming and asking them to come to the center. And I was a very sort of young boy who was just observing from a distance that these adults are sitting there talking. And after a while, my dad and mom started to go to the center. And my dad told me that actually when his brother-in-law had kept encouraging him to come, he actually felt very guilty because his commitment was to the Hindu temple and to this other gentleman who was sort of a leader, who was really teaching them the verses from the Indian scriptures. And so he really felt very guilty that he should sort of switch over, so to speak.
Kind of conflicted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he told me that, in fact, he once had a dream where Swami came in the dream together with that man. And my dad realized that it's the same. So my dad made the switch over, and I was still far too young to appreciate that. And I think I'm talking to you about 1979, and I was about 13 that time. And he became eventually the treasurer of the Sai Center. And then in 1981, I was reconciled to the fact that I would not be going overseas to pursue my university education, and my dad was very insistent that I do my law degree in Hong Kong. And then suddenly one day out of the blue he says to me, oh, if the forms for studying in England have come out, you can go out and get that form. And I was quite shocked to hear that because he'd been very insistent that I would not be going overseas. And that's when he sort of gave me an inducement, which was come to the center for this last year of your secondary school and allow you to go to England. And of course I jumped at that. And so I did that once a week. I'd come to the center, not knowing why I'm there, what I'm doing there, but yes. I was there.
All you could see was England.
Yeah,
the shores
just
of England.
waiting for that. Yeah. And then I actually went. And in those days when you went overseas to England, you came back 9 months later. You didn't come back every Christmas or Easter.
Right.
So 9 months later, I came back to Hong Kong at the end of my first year, and then, well, you just go to the center, and then you do that your second year, and you come back and you just go to the center. So it just became a natural thing to do. And then I've got my law degree, and I've got my bar qualification. But you're just now so ingrained in that center, so you just stay on. And little did I realize that when I said yes to my dad, that I would come to the center for 1 year in that last year of high school, that actually I was saying yes to Swami. And 38 years later, here I am. And so it's been, it's really been a blessing because the university education was given by him. The qualification at the bar was given by him. But most importantly was that opportunity from the beginning of your career to be able to serve him, to be aware of him. and then eventually I became a Science Center president, and then you just work your way in the organization and, given opportunities to serve. And then looking back now, it's very, very gratifying because, he got you from a very young age, and he kept you in the center, and he gave you this qualification, and he allowed you to serve him. Throughout your whole legal career, you're serving him. And I think what a tremendous blessing. The journey has been checkered in many ways. It's been a slow learn, but I suppose maybe that's the way it had to be. And if I've come to one conclusion is, Swami determines the pace at which you proceed, not you, and all the sort of things that I've gone through, all the rights and the wrongs, the good things, the bad things, the mistake, maybe that was all necessary, just so that you can, look back and say, that is the journey I went through, what is the meaning of it, and what have I learned from it? And you realize that the organization has really, really taught me a great deal, immense amount, about so many things. And there's all the good, happy things in the organization, and there's also the difficult things and challenging things in the organization. And you learn from everything. And you also realize that, he puts you through that fire, and he sort of takes your innocence away in some sense. And, you begin to go through a bit of the tough time. And I think all that does is just strengthen you, make you more determined in your service. And it prepares you for so much more. When I stepped down as the national chair of Hong Kong, that was really the time when I had time to think about my own spiritual life, which you don't really sometimes do when you're in the organization because you're so busy running with projects and things to do. But once I'd stepped down, he put me on a path of reading, and he got me reading some really wonderful stuff, and the Bhagavad Gita came into my life. And it's that period when the sort of the primary responsibility of being in that position of national chair is no longer on you, when you can sort of take a deep breath and
relax a little bit.
Well, I shouldn't say that. But it's really focusing on your own spirituality, focusing on the teachings and what they mean to you, contemplating on that and saying, what does it really mean? And you find out that as you take that interest, those teachings are working themselves on you. And Swami sort of, making it easier for you to connect to him. And so I always say that those first few years after I stepped down were a tremendous blessing because of that hindsight. When you can look back at your service as national chair, you can look back at the incidents and you can say, what can I learn from this? How can I make myself better? How could I have done this differently? And I realized that, there's so many lessons to be gained from that. But the beauty of that is I still have, with Swami's permission, quite a few years ahead of me in serving the organization, serving him. And one thing I've decided is the way I served in the last 10, 15 years is not a statement of my service in the next 10 or 15 years. The period of sort of refinement, the period of reflection, the period of study, that makes you better. And so I'm really looking forward to my next 15 years of service, if I'm allowed to, and to bring that sort of greater experience and greater reflection on what you want from your service, how you should be conducting yourself in your service, how you should be carrying yourself, what messages are you sending to the younger people, what messages are you sending to people as an officer of the organization. You start thinking about these things a lot more, and you're more conscious of the fact that thankfully you are associated with him, and but that brings a lot of responsibility, and that's so that's that. And then there's also what can I do to share? I look back and you realize, as you went through all those 20 years or so, you realize there's certain things you could have done differently, and I can't change that. But what I can change is what I share with the young people, just so that they walk that path a bit more better instructed, better advised, and hopefully their journey is easier. But that ability to, guide younger people, that ability to reflect and guide myself and my future. That is something only that comes with His blessings. I'm immensely grateful for that.
You mentioned that after a period of service in Sathya Sai International Organization, you took a deep breath and began this journey of self-discovery, as it were.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to undertake that journey as you're doing the work in real time, rather than at the end of a period of service?
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. I mean, different people approach things in a different way. You know, all I guess I can say is that's the way I had to do it. But you know, I will say that being national chair was, and I had a very busy legal practice at that time. It was, you know, I was running two things at one time, and so it is very tiring, and it can be very challenging. Now, did I have the spiritual maturity to deal with that? Maybe not to the extent I needed, and so maybe I would say for me that's the way it had to be, but not necessarily for somebody else. But having said that, that doesn't really matter to me anymore. I think what matters is here and now, where you are looking back, where you are aware of the thoughts and you are aware of the lessons, and you're saying, well, okay, that happened and that's great. You know, those are great lessons and I'm aware of them. Now what do I do? Now how do I change the quality of my service in the next 15 years?
Yes.
So, you know, Swami says past is past. So let go and move on and just make yourself better. And if you can do that, then you know, it doesn't really matter.
So you mentioned that how your visits back from Hong Kong, back from England to Hong Kong during the school holidays were signposted by visits to the Sai Center. And you shared with us how Swami had gotten you into law through this inducement that your father had given you. How, from that point onwards, in terms of practicing law, how have you been able to serve Swami through law?
Well, I'll be quite frank, in the beginning, first few years, I didn't. I served myself. And you're building a legal career and you've got all these aspirations and dreams. But I very quickly realized that, in fact, you know, you don't make your life makes you. And so I got into crime, never wanting to do crime. And I did it for about 10 or 12 years, and actually did it very well. But
criminal law, that is.
Criminal law, yeah,
yes.
That's right. But, you know, criminal law is a funny thing, because you're dealing with all sorts of people with all sorts of stories, and you can sometimes be taken to the edge of that, you know, propriety. And you always have to be very, very sensitive to that. And sometimes, you know, although you don't want to cross that line, you know that those around you are sort of fuzzying that line, you know, and you're part of that process. And about 10 or 12 years in, I decided, you know, I had to stop this. And I couldn't carry on like this because it would not be consistent with Swami's teachings. And actually, in the one interview I had, he actually alluded to that. And, you know, he was so merciful because once I decided that I had to stop this and move away from it, my civil practice took off. And the next
One door closes, another one opens.
That's right. And for 5 or 7 years, I was doing general civil work. And the people I used to see in the courts, in the criminal courts, were saying to me, well, you know, why have you left? And it's such a shame because, you know, you're doing it well, and what a waste of... And I said, no, thank you. I've done enough of that. So I was doing very general civil work. And then in about 1997, I got instructed in some personal injury cases, you know, people getting hurt at work or getting hurt in traffic accidents. And that practice took off. And that's what I've been doing since that time, and then built up a practice in clinical negligence. And so that type of work is a lot easier, where you're less conflicted, because you really just either working on the side of the plaintiff who's been injured and trying to get fair compensation for him, or alternatively you're working on the other side for the defendants who are engaged, who have instructed lawyers, you know, through the insurance company, and they're just seeking to ensure that fair compensation is paid. So, you know, having made that decision to move away from crime, it was orchestrated in a way that I moved into an area where I was not as conflicted, and it's much easier to sort of follow that straight line. But, you know, it's a difficult thing, you know, whether it's in the law or in anything else, it's a difficult thing, especially when there are professional demands on you. But I suppose that's where we need to decide what is it that we really want. If you want the professional success and you're prepared to do certain things for it, well, that's fine. But you pay for everything. Nothing's free. And so, if we're trying to make Swami a more center part of our lives, I don't know if we can do that if day in and day out we're not being true to his message. And I think he's very forgiving, he's understanding, but you have to make that decision. And he got me to make that decision, and then he made it work. So I think, we all have to decide what we want. And as I said, it's not just a question for lawyers, it's a question in any industry. But the greater I got involved with the SAI organization and eventually became national chair, and that's when you become a bit more sensitive to what you're doing, that's when you are representing the organization. And you need to be more mindful. But even that way, the mind plays its tricks, and you try to divorce your professional life from your center life and your family life, and you create these really artificial barriers just to justify them to yourself. But then I think, the more you keep focusing, the more you're serious about your sadhana, there will come a point when that penny will drop, and when you say enough is enough. And so I think we all have to reach that stage, and so the only thing I would share to someone is have faith in Bhagwan. If he causes you or wants you to leave something, he will open another door for you. You just have to have that faith, and that's how it's worked out for me. And so one of the things about myself as a advocate, when people come to conference and we're talking about the cases, whichever side it's on, I will be truthful. I will say, this is your case, these are your strong points, these are your weak points. I'm not going to dress it up. I'm going to be very straight about it. And that's not necessarily the best legal tactic, to keep work. But that works, and as I say, there comes a point you really have to be true to yourself. And, the funny thing is, I've never worked for money. It's come, and if you say to me, do other people at the bar make more money than you? Of course they do. Are there other people at the bar who have achieved greater careers than you? Of course there are. But the thing is that what you really want? Is that all you want? And that's where I go back to the beginning of the story, where he brought me into the legal profession and he kept me in the center. And you realize that, no, that's not all I want. There's more that I want from life. And as the years went by, you begin to realize, there's things which are more important. And he orchestrated that so wonderfully, because I had a very busy practice, but it was a practice which allowed me to leave the office after 11 hours at, say, 7 o'clock or 7:30, which means I still had time to go into the Sai Center, which meant I could still do that sort of work. I didn't have to do legal work every night. I could still have time over the weekends to do my Sai work. And so it's almost as if he he took me away from crime and he put me in this sort of work, kept me busy, gave me everything I wanted, in terms of career satisfaction, and yet kept time for me to do my seva. And so you ask yourself, well, what more do you want? What more do you really want? And, you pay for everything. You break the rules, you pay for it.
There is the law, and there is the law of karma.
Exactly. Exactly. And, so I think everybody, whichever career they're in, they need to decide what's really important for them. What do they really want? And you pay for everything.
You mentioned earlier about the line of impropriety and nudging it, coming quite close to it, but reminding yourself of which side of the line you're on. I think that is a metaphor that might resonate with a number of people, especially young people who are considering careers, and also who face these sorts of challenges in their various professions, be it law or commerce or even healthcare. What advice would you give to people who are grappling with ethical dilemmas of examining the side of the line of impropriety, whichever career they're having to be?
Yeah, as I said earlier, you need to ask yourself, what is it that you really want? That, we need to think about that. But the other thing I would say is go pray to Swami. Pray, what do I do? How do I survive in this? And I think if you're sincere, he'll respond. so many opportunities can come up. For me, for example, it was moving away from crime into general civil and moving into the area I'm in now, which I do reasonably well at. And so I think, turn to him. Because if that's the path he wants you to thread, he will help you. But I think the worst thing you can do is be fearful, to say, I dare not move away from this because, I will lose the opportunity given to me. And I think we all need more courage. We all need to be true to the teachings that we purport to adhere to. And if you're not true to it, then what's your relationship with Swami like? Then you need to ask that question. But I think if you do turn to him and say, help, I really need help in this, then leave it to him, and he will respond.
We tend to often forget that, don't we? Because we're so enmeshed in the situation itself that we forget there is another way, which is just to pause and ask him, and constantly ask him.
Yeah. It may not be obvious to us,
Yes.
but it's obvious to him.
Yes.
So turn to him.
Well, Ashok, in the last few moments that we have left, I'd like to go back with you to that first interview you had with Swami. What was it like? What were your memories and recollections of it? What were the highlights, and how has it helped you in your life?
Yeah, we were in Prashanti because in Hong Kong we were about to have our very first teacher training seminar. And so me and someone else from Hong Kong had gone to Prashanti. And there was a big group from Korea as well. And we were all part of the same zone. And so we'd prepared, in those days, an A3 poster. And we pasted on it the program sheet and asked for his blessings. And nothing was really computerized in those days. And
Which year was this?
That was 1993. It was the Christmas of 92, New Year's of 93. And so we went prepared with the program. And eventually the group from Korea got called in. And I was fortunate. The senior officer in charge for Hong Kong, he allowed me to enter with that group. And so we sat in that interview room, and I was sitting right at the back. And Swami was giving a discourse and talking to the people. And I remember the first lesson I got from Swami when he was talking about how you take the number 1 and you put zeros behind it, and how the more zeros you put behind it, the bigger the numbers get. And then he said, but if you take that 1 away, all those zeros account for nothing. And that 1 is God. So that's the first lesson I got from Swami. And then the interview went on, and he was interacting with the different people, and I was just by the back and the side. And then he got up, and he came right up to me. Clearly he knew I had this program that I wanted him to bless, and he came up to me and he started talking to me, and having the sort of questions which you would have with anybody, where have you come from, what do you do, and that sort of stuff. And so that was wonderful. He asked me what I was doing, and then, as I said, he made some allusion to the work I was doing. And he signed that poster, and I will say that whole very, very brief interaction was extremely emotional, and I can't account for that, And anyway, that interview was over, but clearly some connection was made, and we went back outside, and those were the days of the hall being full of sand. I mean, there was that big statue of Ganesh in the middle.
Before the cycle went hall.
That's right, and along the sides, you remember, it was a covered area.
Yes, those arches.
That's right, and we were inside the arches, and he came out, and I was with my friend who I traveled to Puttaparthi with from Hong Kong. And I was holding my hand out with 2 vibhuti packets, hoping that he'd bless them, because I was specifically instructed to get some vibhuti and try to get it blessed. And he came and he walked past, and then he stopped and he came right back, and he said, "Lawyer, right?" and tapped the 2 packets of vibhuti, and he walked on. And that was the first time when I really saw his sweetness. That was really nice. So that was that incident, and then after. That was, as I say, very early January 1993. In February 1993, I became Sai Center president, and from there, my involvement with the organization took off. And so it's been wondrous. It's been a wonderful experience to have Swami in your life. And I would always say that if the last breath you take, the one but last thing you say is thank you, Swami, for this life and for the opportunity. And if the last breath you take is Sairam, and you die. How wonderful it is. What more do you want? To have lived your whole life with your Guru part of it, to be part of the organization that he lent his name to be able to serve it, and at the very end to remember him. What more do you want in life? And along the way, he's given you all the trappings of professional success and financial success. What more do you want from life? And so I'm very grateful, extremely grateful for that opportunity. And, when you hear him say things like, which he has said in a message to Charles Penn many, many years ago, which they read out in 1985, 1990. And in that message he says, I have prepared you over many incarnations to do this work. I have drawn you to me. How does one begin to rationalize those things? But those comments from your Guru and God, and then that real opportunity to serve him until the very end, it's the greatest blessing. It's the greatest blessing. What more would you want?
Brother Ashok, you've taken us on a journey from a small boy in shorts playing in a garden or park in Hong Kong, through the environment, through a career in law, working with us at the Sai International Organization, right to the end of a journey that is still to continue, which is the last but one breath, the last thoughts. The undercurrent in all of this, of course, has been Bhagavan of the Sai Baba.
Of course.
And to him goes our gratitude, and to the Swami and you for being so generous with your experiences and thoughts. Thank you very much.
Sarah.
Om Shri Sai.
Sarah too.